Welcome, welcome. This is the Inner Enlightenment Show, and I'm your host, Laurie Schoenfeld. Thank you for all of those who are joining us live and for those who will join us later on the replay. I am so excited to introduce you to our guest today. She is someone that I'm a huge fangirl of, and I just admire consistently, Sarah Glenn Marsh. She's the author of the Reign of the Fallen series, and we're going to be chatting today about joy in expression and creativity. Welcome, Sarah. So excited to have you here.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here. I've been looking forward to this for a couple months now, so I'm really glad we made this happen.
Absolutely. So I want to dive in to Sarah is multi-talented, and one of the reasons I'm such a huge fan of Sarah is she's constantly using different forms of expression to use her voice and also different areas of creativity to really voice her thoughts and her ideas, as well as using joy in that expression. And so every post that she does is uplifting, it's passionate, it's playful, and I look forward to every post that she shares. So thank you for being you, Sarah, and bringing that joy to all of us in the social media world.
I try to do what I can. I mean, it's that's such an interesting thing. It's a double-edged sword, right?
Mm-hmm.
How you curate your social media space, because on the one hand, right, you're only seeing select clips from someone's life. And so mine might intentionally be more positive, for instance. It tends to be that way for a lot of people. And I think that's the trick, right? It's nice to see those things, but it can also make you feel bad when you're scrolling through feeds and comparing yourself. And that's a really tricky thing. It's interesting.
100% agree.
Yeah.
Let's talk about your writing and how you've used your writing to be able to express what you just talked about, all the layers that you're feeling, not just the positive and the motivational, but the depth, the sorrow, and all the feelings that come through as humanity is unfolding. As there's a lot of layers that are constantly moving through us. How has writing helped you personally to be able to heal some of those pieces within you or understand those pieces within humanity?
I love this question. I'm going to use Reign of the Fallen as an example because it was a book that was really personal to me. So when I wrote it, at the time, there were not really any books published in the traditional YA space that had bisexual leads in them. So I thought when I wrote it that no publisher would possibly want it. And I thought that I was writing it just for me, just as a private experience. And there was something about that like curtain of privacy that I felt that I had because I didn't have any intentions to share it with anyone. So I feel that I was able to give more of myself to the book and to my main character, and fantasy in general. Reign of the Fallen is a fantasy second world story, so I created the world and the rules. And fantasy like that, I think, is a really wonderful place to explore what you're touching on there, those deeper layers of emotion and emotional conflict, because it's so removed from our world. And I think gaining that distance, it's easier to look at some really hard things. So with Reign of the Fallen, my main character deals with addiction, which is not something that I've ever dealt with, but moreover, that addiction is a result of her grief. Mm-hmm. And that was a really interesting thing. So my grandmother was really sick when I started writing the book. She did make it through that period of time, but like she was in and out of the hospital constantly, and I was really processing that. And that was kind of what actually gave me the idea for the book in the first place. I was thinking about like how far somebody would go to bring someone they loved back from the dead, or to spare them the consequences of aging and all this. And it got me thinking, like, well, why are necromancers always the bad guys in stories? This is a whole other tangent, but they're always portrayed as so evil. And I thought, well, couldn't it kind of be a kind thing to bring someone back, to save someone from death? Couldn't that be heroic? And so that was the premise for the story. But my side tangent aside, my point was that I got to experience this grieving journey along with my main character. And that was a really helpful and powerful thing. It was really interesting. So I actually later, after I had finished writing it, experienced a worse loss, and that was really traumatic. And it was something where, like, I woke up, had no expectations that anybody was going to be dying, and it was horrible. And I then sort of viewed it through the lens of what I'd written in Reign of the Fallen and what Odessa had been through. And I got to see that, like, well, grief really is messy, and all the things that I got right and got wrong. And there really wasn't a lot that I feel that I got wrong, since it is such an individual thing. But yeah, I think, whether it's grief or something else, there's a lot that you can work through, that you bring to your writing, and whether as consciously as I did or more subconsciously.
Mm-hmm. I love the depth that you shared about really being in that moment with someone that you love dearly, and like bringing in all those layers of how you were feeling through the loss, but also really appreciating that time with your loved one and being present in that moment. Do you feel when you write, Sarah, that there's that presence with your artist and your characters of just kind of a similar thing of walking through those feelings and those emotions, but also enjoying the journey and being present with where it's taking you to?
Oh, definitely. And I mean, I think my favorite thing, or the sign of like a successful writing session, is one where you lose track of time and where your characters surprise you. So, I mean, my favorite thing in the world is to sit down and, like, you're smiling. I can tell you know what I mean. So when you sit down and you have one intention for your characters, and you're like, well, this is going to go like this because this is how they think. And then they're like, voila. And that's how you can tell that you've created something that's a little more sentient, and that you're connected to something that's bigger than yourself. And I just think that is part of the joy of writing. And I think that's what makes it so exciting, and draws me back to it, right? Again and again, because there's always something new that you can take away. And again, you're like, I can tell you get what I mean. For sure. Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah, there's multiple scenarios where I thought it was supposed to go a certain way, and it just takes over you of like, no, this is actually where we're going, divert. And they have their mind, but it's magical in the way that it flows in the way it needs to be.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I love that you were walking through, because we're both beautiful bisexual women, and you had brought that in, that was kind of the beginning stages of writing, of trying to tap into those emotions. Was there a lot that you were walking into trying to understand pieces of who you are and versus what society thinks you should be, or what did that look like for you?
That's a great question. Where to start? So when I was writing, I was like I said before, it was such a private experience. Mm-hmm. So within that, it felt very sheltered, and my identity, it was something that I already knew about myself. Mm-hmm. That was something that I accepted about myself. But the stumbling block for me actually came later, when I did decide to seek publication. And when I did decide to label the book as Own Voices, and so for any of your listeners who might not know, Own Voices means that it is a story told by someone who identifies as part of a marginalized group. So when I reached out to agents about the story, I did label it as Own Voices, and that in itself, I mean, that was a first. And then when the book was picked up for publication, because it was such one of the earlier queer young adult mainstream books to come out, there was a lot of coming out involved on my part constantly, which was really interesting. And it wasn't something I was prepared for, really. I wasn't out to my family. And I was being asked to do interviews and stuff where people were asking me about that aspect of the character. And in fact, it was something a lot of people wanted to talk about. But there's an upside to this, which is that I cannot tell you how many people contact me to this day. And so Rain came out 3 years ago. It was like January of 2018. How many people to this day email me or approach me after conferences, pre-pandemic, obviously, to tell me to come out to me and to thank me for the representation in a genre of book where they're not usually seen in the YA space. And I'm so honored that someone feels they can come out to me. It tells me that what I wrote created a space that, I mean, to me, there is no higher compliment. It's great that I was able to create a space where they felt seen, they felt like they belonged, and then that they could then had a level of trust with me from reading it that they could tell me that is incredible. And I still love to receive those emails. And so even though there were aspects of that process that were hard, I ultimately, I chose to come out all those times for all those interviews because I think the visibility really matters. I think that's what it's saying when all those people email me is that mattered. And I'm so glad that I was in a place, with myself where I could do that for them. So.
Well, thank you for writing those beautiful characters and sharing that piece of your heart. It definitely opens up doors for other people to give themselves permission oftentimes and to not feel so alone or unheard. Absolutely. By knowing there's other people that understand and get it. So thank you for being that voice, Sarah. You are an animal lover. We were talking about this a little bit. I love animals too. You have 2 doggies, right?
I have 4 dogs.
4 doggies. Oh.
I have 4 dogs. Oh, yeah.
I love your dog pictures.
Thank you.
And you enjoy animals of all kinds. I've seen all sorts of pictures of like an owl on your shoulder, which I love owls as well.
Oh, they're great.
What is your favorite thing about animals that really speaks to your heart?
Well, you know what? It's actually, as someone who, I love words, I love reading and writing, but I love that animals don't speak our language. I love that we have to be quiet and find other ways to communicate with them. I mean, gosh, my best relationship ever was with my dog, Grim. Grim was a greyhound. He's since passed, but he was about 90 pounds. He was the biggest greyhound I've ever seen. And I used to be really afraid of big dogs. There was just, and not because I'd ever had a bad experience with a dog. I love dogs, but something about his size was so intimidating. I'll never forget, like when he first came in our house, but he was so aware of his size. And he was my soulmate. We were like 2 parts of the same thing. And the relationship that we had was just incredible. And it was able to be that without being able to share a language. Like we found languages to share. And there's just a lot of value in that companionship when you can just be with someone without having to talk. And I think that animals really offer that. Except my birds. I have 3 birds and they scream a lot. So if you hear them, they're very loud and they like to be heard.
What kind of birds do you have?
So we have 2 cockatiels and we also have a scarlet-chested parrot. She's a rescue. She's elderly. Yeah.
Aww.
They're Angelica, Peggy, and Eliza. So
I love that. So do they sing and talk on their own?
They're female. And so with cockatiels, and your listeners can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think male cockatiels can speak. Females can't. I'm certain on the female thing. So they don't, but they have their things that they'll scream at. So around 8:30 every night, they start yelling at us to put them to bed. And if we forget, like if we're watching TV or we're doing something, they will escalate the noise until our eardrums ring and we put them to bed. They keep their own bedtime. They're so funny. They really do. They're interesting.
I love that. My daughter, well, I have one daughter that puts herself to bed, and it's like my other two, they can stay up all night, but she'll put herself to bed. I'm like, wow, I love it. It's so interesting. She'll just
That's
go and
amazing.
do her thing, you know?
I love that. I'm all for it.
Where do your dogs sleep? Do they sleep in your bed with you, or do they sleep on the side of the bed with you?
Well, believe it or not, they actually, so again, there are 4 of them, which is quite a lot. They're all very big. So three are greyhounds. One is a Saluki. And a
Mhm.
Saluki it's sort of like a greyhound. It's another sighthound. It's in the same family. He has like long tapered ears. I'm sure you've seen him. He's the one he has his own chair. He's really well, anyway, they all sleep downstairs. So he sleeps in his chair and the other ones sleep in their beds. They all have their little nests. And I would love them to be in our bedroom, and certainly have space. But my husband, Chris, has allergies, asthma, some stuff. So we just, out of an abundance of precaution, he's not allergic to them, but anything they might bring inside,
Yeah.
we keep them downstairs. But they have their little routine. Yeah, they're pretty good.
Yeah, my husband's very allergic too, so we're kind of the same way with our dog as well. So I get that. And they play a lot outside. You never know what they're going to bring in, with the
Right.
seasons. Hmm.
Oh, we live, so our house, we have a nice yard for them to run around in, and it backs up to woods. And they will come in sometimes where our fence is wrought iron. So there's spacing like this between the bars. They will stick their heads through and get skunked. And they will bring in a face full of skunk, which is disgusting. Yeah. So, yeah, you just never know what you're going to get with our yard. Oh, frogs. Sometimes in the summer, we get these frogs that breed under. We have a fire pit. It's on a concrete paver, and there's a hole in the concrete, and these frogs breed under it. It's the weirdest thing. But the dogs will come inside with frogs on their backs. It does kind of make me scream a little bit, just because of the motion. It's so fast, and they're so little, and they're jumping. Oh my gosh! Yeah,
So they're little, like I'm trying
like the
to
little green guys. Yeah,
and they're just like getting a ride on
they
your
just
dog's
hitch a
back.
ride.
They're having an
Mm-hmm.
adventure.
Yep. Yes, it's bizarre. So
There's a
we'll
story
catch
right
them and
there.
pop them outside, and yeah, it's really weird.
You've done both YA novels as well as you've written picture books, which is super fun. I would love to hear some of the differences that you've noticed and also enjoyed between a picture book and a novel, of how to construct both.
All right, not a problem. So it's a question I get asked a lot, since I do a lot of picture book work as well. It's always something I'm happy to talk about. I love both. So my background, coming into writing, I have a master's in elementary education. So my introduction to children's literature was actually being in the classroom with first grade students. And I loved teaching them how to read and connecting with them over books. That was always my favorite part of the day. And I started out writing YA. So I did write novels first. And let me tell you, I actually think, and I know this sounds crazy, I think novels are easier. The
Mm.
reason being, you have 100,000 words to tell a story. Well, I expect you to be able to tell a story in 100,000 words. Come on, that's a lot of space. I expect that you can tell a story that has a beginning, a middle, and an end when you have that much space. However, with a picture book, okay, you have parents prefer them shorter. So that's the first thing to keep in mind. So you have 500 to 600 words to give your story a beginning, a middle, and an end, and have character development. Wow, that is a drastic difference, and it really is challenging. So with picture books, I only write the text, to be clear. So I'm not an author illustrator. I wish I could draw. I love art. That is not me. I love paintings and art and fan art. It's so cool. I can't even do a pretty stick figure. Like, truly, that gene, I missed that one. That's not a talent I have. So I just write picture book texts. And as an author, something that helped me when I was starting out, you can look online and type in like picture book template or 32-page picture book layout, because that's going to be your standard. That's for fiction picture book layout. Now, I do nonfiction picture books as well, and those can be a lot longer. So for instance, I have one about Anna Strong. It's a biography about her and her work in the Revolutionary War. That's almost 1,000 words long, but it's for 4th and 5th grade classrooms. So of course, even within picture book, that's just to say there's a lot of nuance and there's a lot of room to maneuver. But for fiction, I'm assuming that might be where some of your listeners have an interest in writing. That 32-page standard template, that's going to help you a lot because it's going to show you where to introduce the story problem. And also, obviously, reading a lot of picture books is really helpful. So read your favorites, find, what works for you, what you really enjoy about those stories. And that's pretty much how I work. Yeah, I think picture books are a lot tougher. It's a small space, and there's a lot of challenge and a lot of nuance in that. And the other aspect of it, because I only write the text, is leaving enough, how do I say this? Enough space in the story for the illustrator to also tell a story with their pictures. So, you might want to say the man in the red hat and the purple coat went to the store, but you're just taking away all the agency from the illustrator who maybe, the man's having a bad day and she wants him to wear a blue coat or whatever it may be. So there's a lot to think about with every word you choose to put down in a picture book, because you're also going to have this other person filling in this whole visual world that will also tell a story alongside yours. It's just so different to novels. And that's why it's easy to work on both at the same time, because they're really different. You're switching your brain from one thing to another.
Yeah, I've always thought for sure I tried my hand once at picture books, and it's like, even just writing a blurb or a query, it is how to condense a whole story idea in just a very limited setting, like you mentioned, but still hit those points.
And you have to make people feel something in that little tiny space. It's really it's hard. It's a good feeling to finish one, though, for sure.
I love that you like reading to first graders. There's something really special when you sit down with a book. And I know that you've experienced this. Sit down with a book with kids and they're really engaged in the story. It's like a whole experience. Do you, when you are reading with kids or when you've gone to school settings, what's kind of the feel that you love the most as you're reading to the kids?
Oh, that's a good question. I think that it's really similar to the feeling that you get when you're at the movie theater. So there's something really different about, and we've all learned this during the pandemic, about watching a movie at home by yourself on your couch and watching it in the theater with other people. Because even though nobody's talking necessarily, there's this shared emotion. And so I think that's definitely the part that I enjoy the most is the shared emotion that's going on as we all react to the story. And school visits are one of my favorite parts of being an author. I think it's something that all authors should experience if they write for kids, because it reminds you who your audience is. And if you're not thinking about them, you're not serving them, I think it's really important to get out there, spend face time with them, obviously when it's safe, but to connect with them. And I've been really privileged to work with preschoolers all the way through. I've done high school visits. I was lucky enough to mentor a group of high school students, it's a whole classroom, through each writing their own story, and we published them for them in an anthology. And it was really empowering for these kids, and it was so cool for me to get to know every single one of them through their ideas and to encourage their ideas. A lot of these student writers, some of them were almost nonverbal. So this was a range of abilities. Some of them were leaps and bounds ahead with these, just, you just handed them a piece of paper and they were off. But so to be able to work with such a varied group of, I want to say there were 20-ish students, was a real treat. And to see them all year and watch them grow was amazing. I've also worked with incarcerated youth. That was a massive privilege that was worked on for a couple of years for me to get to go in there. And I can't wait to do more of all of that. We can't forget our kids who are in the justice system as well. And, as soon as the pandemic lessens up, I'll gladly be back to it.
Yeah. There's such a need for our generation right now, kids of this generation. With what you just mentioned, have you noticed that writing has been very healing and a voice for this generation to also walk through those emotions and feelings that they're feeling, to really have a place for them somewhere?
Oh, definitely, because, writing is so personal. And, and it goes along with reading, right? How reading, when you read a story and you put yourself in someone else's position, it builds empathy, because it's the only opportunity that we get to live another life and to have another experience outside of our own identity. And that's massively important. And I don't think that there is a video game or a TV show, and I love video games and TV shows, so I'm not knocking them, but I don't think that there is another form of media that produces the same emotion or reaches people the same way as writing can. And I think that absolutely for those students, it was so empowering, even just to see that they could complete a story. For some of them, that was what was empowering. Like, they wrote a story, and to hear that their idea was good or that it was interesting, to watch their face light up and watch them tear out of their room with like a sense of purpose was just awesome. I was very grateful to get to do that and to see that, because it reminds me why I like to write and why I come to it as well.
Absolutely. I'm going to put a link in the comments below to also showcase some of Sarah's. She didn't create this one, but I brought this up because she creates amazing ceramic pieces. Her mugs are some of my favorites. I actually have a few on my wish list that she puts up all the time. I do want to ask Sarah, what really drives you to create pottery? Like, how does pottery speak to you?
So pottery was a total surprise to me. I used to take watercolor classes at a local art center, and I wasn't like the world's greatest. It was kind of frustrating. Watercolor is really hard to learn because the paints are so thin and runny. Anyway, I decided to sign up for ceramics. I got waitlisted for a whole year. That's how popular this thing is to get into this. It's a small studio and there's limited space. And so I signed up, and I really wanted to get in there. Finally, I did after about a year, and I showed up my first day. I remember this. I was wearing a dress, like a cute little dress. That's not how you want to show up to pottery. You want your hair up in like a messy thing. You want old clothes on. The teacher took one look at me and goes, "Oh dear, let's get you an apron. You must be new." But anyway, pottery. So I had no idea what to expect. Pottery is all working with your hands. It's all eventually. I moved from hand building to the wheel, so I do wheel thrown pottery. And what the wheel is it's very physical. I don't know if people realize that, but clay is really heavy when it's wet. And so it's very physical work, and it's a lot of muscle memory. And what I love about pottery, two things, and how it's different from writing. So first of all, at the end of a throwing session, you come away with finished pieces. There's something very satisfying about that, because writing takes a very long time to produce something that's finished, that's satisfying. And so for someone who is creative, to have an outlet where, you come away with something and there's that, not immediate, but almost, kind of instant gratification is really wonderful. And then going back to how physical it is, you could have the worst day in the world and come into the studio and you can work it out on the wheel. And I love that. It's a great place to brainstorm because, I mean, your brain kind of, it's filled with lovely white noise. Everything turns off. The world goes away when you're on the wheel. There's a certain level of focus it demands that sort of shuts a lot of the everyday noise out, is what I'm saying. And so, yeah, there's a lot of emotions you can work out on the wheel. There's a lot of brainstorming you can do. It's a really wonderful, focused, demanding activity.
I love the healing aspect of that too, of really working through those emotions in a way that's expressive and creative.
Working with your hands is so healing. Clay, and that's the thing with clay. It's mud, right? You're playing in the mud because it's wet when you're throwing. You're just basically, you're like a kid again, and you're in the mud, and it's very tactile, and there can be something really soothing about that sensation. And one of the first lessons I learned in pottery, I learned how to center a piece. So that means I had it dead center on the wheel, and I was so proud, and I made a little vase or something. And I called the instructor over, and I want to show her that I made this thing. She goes, cool, now break it. And I'm like, excuse me? And she goes, take it and mess it up. And I was like, what? And she goes, I want you to mess it up. And my first 10 pieces or so, she had me throw them all away, crumple them up in little wet balls. And the point was, it's okay to make mistakes. Nothing is ever going to be perfect, even when you get it right. But it's okay to make mistakes. It's okay to mess up, and it's okay to start over, and you can build that thing back. And that was such a great lesson. It's a great lesson to keep in mind for writing or for other creative endeavors, but it was given to me in such a real way, and it really stuck with me.
I got that visual too, just as you're talking about it. Like, that definitely is a visual you hold.
And I'm a perfectionist. And so, when I get a piece, at first when I would get my pieces fired back from the kiln, I would lovingly wrap them in newspaper and lay them in a box. And now you could see me, go into the studio tomorrow, look at something and go, well, this is a pile of crap, and throw it against the wall and break it. And I'll laugh while I do it. I don't care at all. But it took me, what has it been, 2 or 3 years to get there? So yeah, but it feels good to be there.
Is it cathartic, Sarah, now?
Absolutely, because it's also just that I know that tomorrow's a new day, and I'll make another thing. So this one thing didn't work out. Is that the end of the world? Absolutely not. The sun's going to come up, and I'm going to go back, and I'm going to make something else, and that could turn out great.
I love when my son and I have started breaking plates just for fun. We'll go out in the backyard when he's angry. And that's been a very interesting concept of just letting that go and then piecing back all the pieces together to create a new plate, but molding. So yeah, I was wondering if there was that started feeling.
Oh, definitely. Oh, that's a really cool idea.
It's been really fun and very healing to just release, some of those emotions that we all feel all the time.
Because
we have to. Got to put them somewhere in a healthy way for sure. I would love to turn over one of our inner child questions for you today.
Okay,
let's do it. The first question, what was your favorite thing to do as a kid?
Climb trees. That's an easy one. I was a tree climber. I really liked to there was this one tree that was in front of our house. And I liked to get in that one because it had really long, really strong branches. And I could go, because they were so thick, I could get up where I could see over the roof of our house. And I felt very proud of that. I was defeated by my grandmother's crabapple tree, however. And that was quite a hard fall. And when I fell and I landed and it knocked the wind out of me, all those crab apples were under my back, and I have never forgotten that nasty feeling. Ooh.
And the wind knocked out of you with the crab apples. Yeah. You'd remember.
Yeah, I had that coming, though.
What would you, before we end today, I'm going to put your comments and links, or your links in the comments. So if anyone has any questions after the show or would like to see their books, they will be right there in the comments. Before we end today, what last piece of advice would you like to give the viewers about living a creative life?
Ooh, that's a good question. I'm going to say for today, I'm going to go back to the pottery and breaking the pieces and making new pieces. And I'm going to say, tomorrow's a new day. You can always create more. So don't put pressure on yourself. Life is hard enough. Don't add unnecessary pressure. Approach creativity in ways that feel organic to you, that feel welcoming. So.
Thank you so much for being here with us today, Sarah. It's
Thank
been
you
such
for
a
having me.
pleasure to have my fangirl here chatting with me.
Yeah.
And a big congratulations as well for your Mystery of the Love list that you just.
Thank you.
Yes, and your good news with your family expanding.
Thank you. Thank you.
You are so welcome. And thank you for all that have joined us today and will join us later on the replay. As you go about the rest of your week, just remember that there is so much around you that is working for you. Take one step at a time. You are the only one in competition with yourself, and have a lovely rest of the week. Thank you again, Sarah.
Thanks, Lori. Take care, everybody.